right, will do.
All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. We're on the fourth day of Tipping Point, Connecticut's first affordable housing conference series. My name is Charlie Shaddix. I'm the communications manager at the Partnership for Strong Communities. Throughout the week, we're hosting over 30 sessions featuring local, state, and national experts leading conversations that explore challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around critical next steps to address affordable housing issues in our state. If you're just tuning in after watching Diane Yentl's keynote, then welcome back. If this is your first Tipping Point session, then thank you for stopping by. We've got a great session coming up titled The Intersectional Work of Education and Housing Policy, which focuses on how and where we live and how equitable public policy can create better opportunities for all of Connecticut's families. Before we turn it over to our presenters, I just want to thank a couple of sponsors. Our leading sponsors for Tipping Point are the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Melville Charitable Trust. Their deep support is absolutely crucial for this event to exist. We also want to thank our collaborating sponsor, the Connecticut Department of Housing, and our supporting sponsors, Housing Enterprises Incorporated and Whittlesey. Also, we want to thank our session sponsor for this session, Navigate Affordable Housing Partners. So with that being said, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we turn it over to the presenters. The session is being recorded. We're going to make all recordings available to conference attendees as soon as possible, and we'll send you an email after the conference with those links on YouTube. All participants for this meeting have entered muted. Please remain on mute unless a presenter has asked you to unmute. If you have a technology issue, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send it in the chat to myself at PSC Zoom meetings or to Kaylee Pratt. We will do our best to assist you. Your presenters will let you know how they would like content questions to be submitted. And a couple of minutes before the end of the session, we're going to launch a poll that asks for your feedback on the session. Please take a minute to share and help us improve future webinars and conference offerings. Finally, the Partnership for Strong Communities is working to better understand the needs of our communities and affordable housing partners. We're working right now on a restructuring of our Home Connecticut campaign for affordable housing in Connecticut. Towards the end of the session, we're going to be sharing a link to a survey in chat. Please take a few minutes after the session to share your feedback and shape both the issues we work on and the ways we work. It's not going to take more than 5 minutes, and it's really going to help us help better serve the community. I'm now going to turn it over to presenters to get it started.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. So Charlie, just so you know, I do see Jason on the, he's called in, so I don't know if maybe you can unmute him, but hi, I'm Amy Dowell, and I'm the state director for Education Reform Now, CT. And we're a state chapter of a national nonprofit organization that operates as a think tank and a policy advocate, promoting educational opportunities and achievement for all students by increasing equity, protecting civil rights, and strengthening the social safety net. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the Partnership for Strong Communities for organizing this conference. I know for those of you that have been following along this week, you've seen a lot of experts on housing. I will fully disclose, I am not one of them. Certainly, our focus is education, but I'm hopeful that the housing advocates listening today to this panel will hear from leaders who are very much aligned on the mission of helping to expand affordable housing here in Connecticut, but are looking in on this work from a different perspective. So just to frame this conversation, every child should have the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their zip code, is a very familiar premise here in Connecticut. We see it in print all over the place, in articles and people quoting it. Jill Biden even tweeted this very phrase out on Tuesday. Yet it really begs the question, what does that mean here in Connecticut? What are the education and housing policies that would actually help more students and families access these opportunities? And really beyond the per pupil funding, are there ambitious proposals? Are some of these ambitious proposals that we're hearing and are floated, are they viable in a state so committed to local control? So just looking backwards for us, about a year ago, which feels like a very long time ago, we commissioned a poll on a variety of issues related to educational equity as we headed into the 2020 session, that we thought would be, completed pre-pandemic. And we asked questions of Connecticut voters. A strong majority, 69% of Democratic primary voters here in Connecticut believe that the way in which our communities are divided based on race and socioeconomic status is contributing to the state's economic challenges. And 83% of those surveyed believe that the state and local governments have a responsibility to take steps to increase affordable housing. So these data points predate the important reckoning in our nation around racial inequity and discrimination after the murder of George Floyd this summer, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic that has taken over our lives and exacerbated financial hardship for so many. So many know about the ECS formula, or the education cost sharing formula, and how it distributes aid to districts in Connecticut to fund public education, but not how it's really determined. What are the components of that formula? Additionally, there are many other revenue sources and institutional circumstances that reinforce inequities from town to town and from school to school. So transportation costs, for example, special education and English learner programs, teacher salaries, and retirement benefits are just some of the ways that inequities are reinforced. Jackie Rabe Thomas discussed class size, and staffing on Tuesday in her excellent presentation. Another one of these revenue sources that communities rely on to meet the needs of students is school bonding, construction funds. So today our discussion will center on a finance committee bill from last session that we worked on with Representative Rojas, and that we hope will be reintroduced in 2021, we'll see, and which would tie incentives for communities to build and authorize additional affordable housing with a bonus in school construction dollars. Incentivize, sorry, I say authorize. In order to organize this effort, we'll talk about how we built our coalition of allies, and this included Sean from the partnership and advisors from other organizations, and we work together to in advocacy. So just a quick introduction of our panelists. We have the newly elected House Majority Leader, Jason Rojas, with us today, and he's also the Chief of Staff to the President of Trinity College. Hopefully he's somewhere in here. There's Lisa Hammersley, and she's the Executive Director of the Connecticut School and State Finance Project, and the former Republican Senate Caucus Budget Director in the Connecticut General Assembly. We have Sean Gio, the Policy Director for Partnership for Strong Communities, and Liz Donohue of Intersect Public Consulting. She's a strategic partner there and a consultant to ERN, and she's a former Deputy Chief of Staff and Policy Director for Governor Dan Malloy. So, sorry, that was a lot of information to head it off, but I really wanted to frame this. So I'm going to start with questions for Lisa and Jason in particular. What are some of the financial circumstances in districts or state policies that reinforce inequities in public education here in Connecticut? So can you walk us through just some of those components, Lisa?
Sure, Amy, although if you want to go ahead, Representative, I'll certainly defer to you. Okay. I think the largest problem is that roughly 60% of the $11 billion that is spent on K-12 public education in Connecticut comes from local property taxes. When you look at the amount of taxable property that each town has, it varies widely. I was surprised to learn that the difference between the largest equalized grand list is $50.3 billion from the smallest grand list that is available, that is in the state of Connecticut. And so when you have the vast disparities in property wealth, if you increase your taxes by a very small fraction, you're able to levy a significant amount of revenue, particularly if you're a property wealthy community. This allows municipalities to provide educational opportunities that are very different. So if you're a property rich community, you can raise significantly much more money to educate your children. In addition, when you have property poor communities, when you look at the children that they're educating many more children that qualify for free and reduced price lunch, as well as English learners. And so the amount of spending that they are able to provide for their children does not correlate to the level of need that the children have in those districts. So I'll start off with that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that stands out to me as an advocate, and I think a lot of others, is around how we formulate teacher pension retirement benefits. And I think it's one of those things that it's sort of hiding in plain sight. People don't really recognize it as part of a baked in way that we reinforce inequities in school districts. Could you talk a little bit about that, Lisa?
So the state of Connecticut picks up 100% of teachers' retirement costs. I think that the inequities come to place because those districts also have the ability to contribute towards their teachers' retirement costs. Those dollars could be used by the state of Connecticut to provide additional resources to those communities that have higher need. Those districts that do pay higher salaries to their teachers obviously get the benefit because they don't need to contribute towards their teachers' retirement expense, and they're able to provide higher salaries, which of course relates to or results in higher quality teachers going to those districts and staying in those districts. They don't have the same fluctuation with teachers coming in and out of their districts and instability as districts that do not have the ability to provide higher salaries.
Mm-hmm. Representative Rojas, is there anything that stands out to you in terms of state policy that you think has been contributing to inequities in public education from town to town?
Yeah, I think Lisa covered, the primary one, right? The primary funding mechanism for education at the local level is the property tax. And we've seen over the last 10, 20, 30 years as economic development has changed, as where investment takes place, it's happening in our suburbs and our exurbs even, and coming at the expense of really our urban districts and inner ring suburb districts that have largely been gutted over the last 10 to 20 years. I think it began generally with mall development and retail development outside the urban core, which really diminished an already diminished tax base. You think about Hartford, that is home to a significant amount of untaxable property, private colleges, one that I work at, hospitals, state property, and the fact that we haven't funded pilot reimbursements programs for either of those to the extent that they need to be funded has all contributed to an inability for school districts to or towns to raise the revenue that they need to fund school district budgets. In any given town, the school district budget is 70, 80% of the local budget. So you're really, pitting some service needs on one side, public safety, police, fire, we're in a pandemic. To what extent can towns actually fund public health departments adequately versus the needs of school districts? And even within school districts, with so much of the funding having to go to teacher salaries, it comes at the expense of lots of other needs, whether it's school psychologists or social workers or counselors that we know a lot of kids in a lot of our urban districts and inner ring suburb districts have experienced trauma, have unmet psychological needs. You can't possibly meet all of those supports based on the funding sources that a lot of our towns and cities have. You overlay zoning, you overlay economic and racial isolation, all of those things, and you have a recipe for what we have here in Connecticut, which is significant disparities from one town next to another, right? They can be adjacent to each other and you can have significant disparities. You don't have to go out too far to see those disparities. I know Fairfield County and Bridgeport is often cited as one of those really egregious examples of disparities that exist in our community. And I always use the East Hartford and Glastonbury, right? We butt up right against each other. And if you were to look at basically any data point, you would see a gigantic disparity in terms of what's happening for our kids, what are the resources we have for our kids, and certainly the outcomes that happen for our students as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I'm gonna turn to Liz Donohue. Liz and I work together on a variety of issues here at ERN, but we really try and focus on the impacts on students. Where we feel like our role here is to advocate on behalf of students in a conversation. And so, Liz, I'd be interested in hearing from you. Just what are some of the direct impacts on actually children in these equations, academic outcomes, and also just resources?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, to your point, we need to keep students at the center of our work, right? And in understanding both the impact of the curriculum is having on them and what their learning experience is, but also what's going on at home, right? We have a much bigger obstacle if you have unstable housing, for instance, and everything that both Lisa and Representative Rojas were just talking about reinforce, right? You're in this system. And so when you have high expectations for your students, but aren't supporting them with the proper resources, you're not going to get the results that you're hoping for in terms of, you know, developing a thriving student and citizen. So I think we see it in, you know, what I think many of us think about is, you know, broken down buildings or old resources, old textbooks, you know, and not having up-to-date technology that you would see in a community, in a high opportunity community like a Greenwich or New Canaan, or even in the Farmington Valley and Glastonbury, as Jason noted. But you also just, you know, you don't have the wraparound or the extracurriculars that I think other communities think about as really core to providing a strong and quality public education. And so you see each thing kind of nibbled away in terms of the student's experience. And I think those are what we see overall. I think there's also other demands, right? So $10,000 in a suburb may go a little bit further because it doesn't have as many, they don't have as many things to deal with for the student versus Hartford Public Schools, $10,000 has to be spread more thinly across more folks, and we have to, or for across more needs, and that needs to be considered, because if you want to, you know, if we're talking about equity, it's not just a matter of doing equal, it's a matter of giving someone, you know, the step stool so that they can start at the same place as the kid in the town over.
Thank you. I had the pleasure to work with Representative Rojas on an ECS funding formula rewrite in 2017. Now that feels like a long time ago. We're still dealing with sort of, you know, the nature of the ECS funding formula is that it's complex and there's a lot of different components to it. And, you know, some of it has to do with how much you can get done with the political will that's at the table. And so, you know, now there's, you know, increased need because of COVID, because we've learned more over the last 4 years, and because, you know, the need is still there to go back in and perhaps make changes again. You know, I'd be interested to hear from Lisa and from Representative Rojas, you know, sort of what they hope could change about the ECS funding formula, where they think that it falls short, and, you know, and what do you think about the viability of changing some of those components in the years to come?
Do you want me to go first, Representative?
Yeah, I think Lisa and I were both looking at each other via Zoom to see who's going to go first. Go ahead.
It's a very light question for both of you.
I'll defer to you. Go ahead, Representative.
Yeah, no, you know, I mean, I think what we were, I mean, one, you know, I don't know that we've ever actually done an actual analysis to determine the foundation amount, right? Well, what is it actually, what is that base amount that we should determine to adequately educate a student? You know, we have numbers that have been out there. I don't know that we've kind of done the research. And I know even if we were, I'm sure different groups have come up with a different base amount. But right, also trying to have a formula that actually accounts for need. We know that it's based on need. And so whether we're counting for ELL students, you know, we talked about concentrated poverty, right, which I think is at the core of so many of the issues that our school districts are facing. You know, when you have an entire classroom in front of you of students who come with need or under-resourced or didn't have a high quality early childhood experience, they're going to be behind. Or if their parents are both working 2 jobs, right, and can't spend the kind of time that I can with my kids to read with them at night, to give them that homework, to give them the enrichment opportunities. Some families just don't have that choice to be able to make that choice. It puts teachers in a real difficult position when every child in their classroom, or perhaps the vast majority of children in their classroom, are behind on a reading level, or behind on numeracy or literacy or phonics or fluency or any of those things. And I think we need to have a formula that actually adequately accounts for that. And we know, because of zoning policies and housing policies and other things, that we tend to concentrate need in a very limited number of communities in our state. And that's to the detriment of the entire state. You know, I know we're all about home rule here, and towns want to control their tax dollars, right? But right now, all the wealthy communities are basically paying or subsidizing this inefficient model that we have, this inequitable model that we have, a model that basically contributes to additional costs because we're concentrating so much into our districts, into districts that can't raise enough money. So they're subsidizing it anyway. So, right, how do we get over that notion that we're taking money from here and sending it there, or people wanting to stop that from happening, even though it's already happening? So, you know, and the issue with the ECS formula is we have 11, 12, 13 different funding streams, depending on the type of school that you are. Despite the fact that students are students in a classroom, we have a different funding formula for ag schools, for chef magnet schools, for other types of magnet schools, for charter schools, for traditional public schools. And it's really just a mess. And I have to imagine we're losing out on something by not having a unified funding stream that's really based on students and where they are and the need with those students, regardless of where they are.
Yep. Lisa, do you want to add to that?
I think the representative did a great job. So I agree with the representative. I think that the weights that are currently in the ECS formula, there's currently a 15% weight for English learners, a 30% weight for children that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. And there's also a concentrated poverty weight of 5% if your district is 75% or more free and reduced price lunch students. Surprisingly, when I looked at the districts that qualify for that concentrated poverty weight, it doesn't include districts like Bridgeport. So clearly you would imagine that that weight, the threshold is way too high. So significant changes need to occur with regards to the weights. Overall, the population of Connecticut students is decreasing. It's decreased by over 6% over the past 10 years. However, the number of students that have needs are increasing. So you're having a less of a total student population, but the needs of these students are increasing, both with regards to English learners and free and reduced price lunch. And I think that the pandemic just really highlighted the disparity between different districts to provide an appropriate educational opportunity for their students. After the killing of George Floyd, our organization decided to be much more intentional about calling out racial disparities, and we started to look at the racial characteristics of the Connecticut public school population. And we found that while the population is 50% white and 50% student of color, unfortunately, the students of color are congregated a majority in just 10 districts. And those districts spend $2,300 less than the majority white districts per student. And that might not seem like a lot, but you multiply that by 20 kids in a classroom, that's $46,000 less to support those kids in those classrooms. Never mind the fact that these communities, and then because of the needs in the communities, they need to provide much more services. So they function as a healthcare system, they have wraparound services, they provide Saturday programming. So just the disparity in funding is concerning, and I think that additional funds should be provided to those districts that have higher needs. In addition to the unified funding that Representative Rojas highlighted, if you are an English learner and the ECS formula identifies the fact that if you have increased needs, it costs more to educate you. If you are an English learner and you attend a magnet school, you should receive the same weights as if you're an English learner and you're attending a traditional local public school.
Amy, if I could just add to that, understanding, you know, obviously the ramifications of this for our current K-12 students are pretty well understood. But I work in higher education. You referenced I work at Trinity, right? And we've been talking about for years now the fact that overall school age population is declining. So what does that mean for all of our higher education institutions in Connecticut? You know, we know that populations are growing in our urban areas and where primarily our communities of color, and where we're seeing overall declining populations happen to be in white, wealthier communities. So what does that mean for higher education? And what does it mean for them to be able to meet the needs or the remedial needs of a lot of students who are coming out of these under-resourced districts? And then what does that mean for workforce development? We have companies chomping at the bit around workforce and that they can't find talent, whether it's around manufacturing or financial services or health insurance or healthcare. So there's a really systemic impact that all of this is having that I know we often frame it in the context of just K-12, but it's really the entire economy of the state of Connecticut is really at risk here. if we don't find the policy solutions or the political courage to actually deal with it at the front end, rather than trying to spend more money to try to deal with the remedial outcomes that we see coming from so many of these school districts.
I think that's an excellent point, and just it is bigger than K-12, and I think we're seeing that even more with the pandemic. It's giving us, you know, a little space to really think about this, but there is a childcare piece of this as well, particularly for, you know, when we talk about pre-K, and what does that have, right? There is a cyclical nature to this, where you're having an impact on parents and then on their students, and then what they are as a future workforce. And that needs to be, that big picture needs to be considered as we develop, you know, what this new formula looks like or how it should work, and how these other pieces connect to it. I think that's really important to keep in mind, and keeping, again, the student at the center of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you talking about how interrelated all of these pieces are, because, you know, we were looking very hard at completion rates last year as an organization. Now we're moving our attention to, you know, literacy instruction, because they're all so incredibly interconnected. You know, you mentioned remedial coursework. This is just you know, it's a reset moment, hopefully, for a lot of state leaders around the fact that, you know, if we don't attend to our education needs in bold ways right now, we don't seize this moment, we don't make the investments, even with dollars short, we're going to end up suffering on the end of our, you know, our workforce and our college grads and people staying here in the state. So thank you for that, Rep. Rojas. And so I want to pivot a little bit to open choice, because this has been a conversation that's come up in the housing community as well, related to vouchers for families who participate in the open choice program. For those who aren't familiar, open choice is a program where students can apply to attend schools in a different school district, where their ECS funding formula grants are split between the sending and receiving districts, and then the district that receives the student gets an additional bonus in transportation costs, and depending on how many students they take, an additional bonus. So it's been presented as a way to break down some racial and economic barriers for students here in Connecticut. We really only have 3,000 students that are participating in this program a year, which is a drop in the bucket when you have, you know, 530,000 students, public school students, K-12 in our Connecticut school system. But we have been interested in working on this issue. I'd love to talk a little bit more about what we can do to expand this program. What are the benefits? What are the downsides of this? And, you know, talk a little bit more about the possibility of a voucher associated with that. Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think the idea as part of open choice is to use it as a pipeline, or this is one of the potential benefits to it, to use it as a pipeline to help bring new folks into communities they otherwise was not accessible to them. And once you have your children in a new elementary school or in a new school, you know, you become part of that community. And if we can help facilitate that by giving those folks priority in terms of housing within that community, we can create we give them stability, we provide a new higher opportunity community for them to be the benefit of, or their student to be the benefit of, and then we can create another spot for a new family by moving one family over. We then create a new spot for somebody else, and that can help rebalance our communities and provide a way to to diversify in a way that I think we all would really like to see our suburbs benefit from.
Mm-hmm. And I just to point out, open choice is only available in 3 regional areas of our state right now. We haven't expanded it to areas like Danbury and Waterbury that are really bursting at the seams. So that's something that, you know, we would still like to continue to work on for next year. So so I'm going to shift gears a little bit and include Sean in this conversation. I'm sorry, Sean, it's taken us a little bit of time to get through some of the education-oriented conversation, but so we seem to be stuck in a loop of never-ending local control issues here in Connecticut. It's like a broken record. We're hearing some, you know, we saw some very ugly rhetoric last year around hands off our schools and regionalization protests. And now these zoning conversations have bubbled up, particularly during the campaign season. They've just, it's like a, you know, it's reared its head again. How do we address these long entrenched racially and economically unjust circumstances in our state? And should access around housing and education be more of a hand-in-hand policy agenda moving forward? I'd be interested to hear Representative Rojas and Sean talk about that.
Representative, would you like to go first, or yeah? Okay. Thanks, Amy. You know, you mentioned hands off our schools, and I've seen some information that's grown to include hands off our zoning now. So there's no question that land use and the education system and housing are completely intertwined. And when Representative Rojas and Lisa were talking about the ECS formula and the details of the ECS formula, it is so obvious as someone, it is obvious to me as someone that doesn't understand ECS, doesn't focus on it, that it's this Rube Goldberg machine trying to accommodate what we have, a very inefficient division of land use in our state, inefficient, unequal, inequitable. And it reminds me in the housing space we have a qualified allocation plan for low-income housing tax credits. And again, they have a complicated formula that helps try to figure out which projects are best. And some of that is place-based on geography, higher opportunity, what's deemed higher opportunity communities or lower opportunity communities. But there's no question that at the core, our two advocacy areas are aligned, and what they're aligned around is our municipal boundaries. Our school districts are largely set around our municipal boundaries in Connecticut. In Connecticut, you know, in my view, has the misfortune, we were laid out very early, automobile. Our towns are very geographically tiny, which means that I'm allowed to escape the tax base, the tax burden of Waterbury and live in Cheshire. And others are allowed to escape property taxes in Hartford, but work there perhaps and live in Glastonbury. And that's a function of our small geography. And then the school districts are, you know, we have a few regional school districts, but we know most of them align with our municipal boundaries. So that makes zoning and excluding certain uses critical to what ends up being in your student body. And as Representative Rojas mentioned, we know outside of our cities, largely school districts are having enrollment issues. So so that begs the question: why our communities? Why do so many communities take an anti-growth approach? And I don't know if Representative, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what we're seeing with some of these groups that are popping up, I don't know that they're anything new. I think they've been around for decades. They just kind of change what they look like. And, you know I've reached out to the hands off our zoning over the election cycle. My opponent at the time was suggesting I was trying to do all sorts of evil things to towns in Fairfield County. Not really. So I reached out to the group, said, hey, I'm happy to have a conversation with you anytime. And I never heard back. Right. So I don't know how serious they are. I think they're serious about trying to stop things from happening. I don't know how serious they are about actually engaging in a policy conversation. which is really unfortunate, right? You know, I don't know that those groups are representative of everybody who live in those communities. But, you know, like is often the case in politics, the loudest voices tend to dominate the conversation, even if they don't really represent the viewpoints of the vast majority of people who might live in that particular area. But, you know, none of it is surprising to see. You know, it is part of the political psychology of the state to do everything at the micro level. You know, around the rest of the country, we have counties that address these issues. You look, I always think about Montgomery County, Maryland, right, with their school district. You know, their school district's like 221,000 students, right? And our largest school district in Connecticut is probably 21. And they're able to address these integration issues a bit more easily because they don't have a lot of these political barriers that are in place. And of course, they don't have the psychological barriers because they actually choose and are able to operate at a different level. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to county government. I'm not suggesting we abolish local control. But I do think in the interest of the state of Connecticut, and certainly from a moral perspective, in the interest of the kids that a lot of the students that we're talking about, and this isn't just about students of color, this is also about white students who actually never have a genuine, sincere interaction with a person of color until they get to college. And I work in higher education and we see those tensions manifest themselves all the time on our campuses because the kids have never had an opportunity to learn with each other, to eat lunch with each other. You know, my wife is a guidance counselor at Rocky Hill High School. She notes the kids who come as part of the open choice program. And she also notes how, because there's no after school bus that allows those kids to participate in perhaps sports or clubs, that they never really are part of the school community. And what does that say about both students, the students who live in Rocky Hill and the students who come from Hartford to go to school in Rocky Hill, and they can't build those relationships either. And what it does is result in kind of this perpetuation of racism and bias and prejudice that we see in our country, despite, you know, being where we are in the 21st century.
That's such a good point. So I want to talk about this bill that we had worked on together last year. And Liz, do you want to walk us through some of the components, and then we can sort of talk about how we came about and worked on this together and serve as a case study for other efforts moving down the line?
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, one of the levers the state has in terms of driving diversity within our communities, as it relates to education, right, it has to do with the dollars that school systems are reimbursed for their school construction. And so last year there was a proposal that Representative Rojas sponsored that gave communities a bonus in their reimbursement rate if they chose to be an inclusive community and build affordable housing. There were a couple of components to it of how to get there. But in essence, if you had a reimbursement rate of 20% for your school construction project, which is typical for higher or wealthier communities, higher opportunity communities, then you could receive an additional 10 points to increase your reimbursement rate, which allows you then, you know, to save dollars locally. The idea, again, we are talking about generational change here, but is, you know, within a few years, I think we were thinking within 5, you know, you could start to see new housing being built in a lot of communities where you have not seen any affordable housing built over the last 30 years. So this is a new incentive to put on the table to help move communities in the direction that we would like to see them as being more inclusive, obviously, you know, maybe forego one more McMansion for the sake of bringing in 5 new families to your community. Did I miss anything? I think that covers our bill. It was very simple and straightforward.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think some of the other pieces that we also wanted, you know, towns to change how they do things, right? So part of it was about affirmatively furthering fair housing, right? And being intentional about that. Right. Permitting multi-use housing, right? You actually have to make some changes to get that reimbursement, right? And allow housing to develop in your community. And, you know, I think, you know, for us who are advocates for affordable housing, we also need to change perceptions about what that means. You know, again, I referenced my opponent in the election. She said, you know, are we going to be building Caprini Green again, right? And Avon, or big housing projects like we see in New York. That is not what affordable housing looks like anymore. It actually looks quite suburban. But I think we have to change people's perceptions of it, because I think when you hear affordable housing, I think people immediately go to some awful rhetoric that we used about that, right? With the ghettoization. I think somebody down in Westport maybe used that word in a affordable housing conversation, or that this project was going to result in a ghettoization of Westport, right? And we're not talking about building 8,000 units of affordable housing. We're just trying to get to 5 or 10. Unfortunately, right, which doesn't adequately address the issues that we have, but at least is a step in the right direction of trying to make our communities more diverse, not only with people, but obviously with housing stock.
Sean, do you want to add to sort of how we work together on this process?
Sure. And just a coda though, what the representative was just talking about, the Westport comment, that project was at least partially made up of duplexes and small discrete buildings that to my mind fit into a Connecticut setting. That is the rhetoric that we hear. But so just more to the point, Amy, of your question, I think what was when you and Liz first approached us at the partnership, it was really exciting because I think for a long time we've worked to try to develop cross-sector partnerships, knowing that and from our perspective, housing is just fundamental to the success of families, the success of kids at school, success of families, access to work and careers and so on. And so one of the core things that and we were talking about this earlier, one of the core things that I think that really benefit from these collaborating across sort of areas of advocacy is how little we often know about the others' work in the details. And so to be able to know that we have common ground and to be able to trust partners to understand the intricacies of school bond constructing, which I knew basically nothing about, and I'm just so impressed with Liz was able to describe in such short order to me, and be able to, that's what real, I think, cross-sector advocates partnerships really require, that trust, and to be able to say, you guys are experts in that aspect of things, how do we get to that common goal? So I look forward to continuing that in conversation.
Thank you. So I see that there are some questions in the chat. I don't know if Charlie or is going to do the questions, or I can start to read them off.
Either way is fine.
Okay. So one of the questions here is about the open choice program. It says, has anyone researched the reasons why parents are not signing up for open choice? This most likely more than marketing issues and may have more to do with cultural identity, limited transportation, other poverty issues. So we spent an incredible amount of time on open choice last year. It was sort of got tacked on to the conversation around regionalization when it looked like there was not going to be the movement that we had hoped to have a more productive conversation around regionalization last year. We talked about the fact that open choice should be an option for every family and every district that wanted to participate, that there really wasn't a logical reason why not. But what comes up all the time for us is that people, that towns don't accept a lot of students, that's really been the barrier, that not a lot of communities are saying, sure, I'd love to open my doors, even with the financial incentives, to really say, yeah, we'd love to take more students. So that's been a really genuine hurdle. And also, the finances of it, and the splitting of the ECS funding formula. If we could just see a scenario where the school districts or the receiving districts receive all of the ECS funding grant for each student, that might motivate people, motivate more communities to take more students. But I don't know. Anybody else on this panel have a?
Yeah, just to expand on that districts are not always signing up for more spots, is that they want to take students only when they're in kindergarten or first grade, because they would like to have that student part of their classes throughout K-12, as opposed to, and this is anecdotal, but getting someone in 5th grade who now they have to catch up with everyone else. At least that's the perception of it, but they definitely, you know, if a community has 5 spots in kindergarten, they want a kindergartner. They don't want an 11th grader to suddenly join. That aside of why they're doing it, and if it's out of concern for test scores or having to make up for what they perceive as other people's mistakes, none of which I know is true. You know, there is, you could see why you would want a student to join a kindergarten class and be with a class and become part of that community for the life of that student. And there's certainly value in that, as you know, Jason pointed out, his wife sees the difference between the open choice kids and the kids who go and can benefit from all the enrichment activities. You want that fully immersive experience for all students, regardless of where they live. And that has benefits to the whole community. But that's certainly it. The other thing is the chicken and egg situation around money. And if there was a different way that we were funding things in a equitable way across all these 11 streams, then there would certainly be a difference as well. And hopefully an improvement around open choice.
I think this question is most appropriate for Rep. Rojas. What do you feel is the likelihood of the legislature taking up the issue of unequal and racially unjust educational funding this coming session?
You know, I think there's attempts to address these issues all the time, right? So there's one question about attempting, and then there's another about doing. So I think we're always going to try. It's a matter of whether the political realities that we face will allow us to actually accomplish anything. And, you know, it's really about our approach too. You know, we talked that there was the school, whatever, regionalization bill. We should not be having discussions about weighty issues like this in a proposed bill format, right? Now I'm talking inside baseball here, but proposed bills are like 4 sentences, 5 sentences that are a concept. And the way that bill went down, it was school regionalization, and the opponents of it, or those who are fearful of it, or those who are opposed to it, framed the conversation for us before we even had a chance to talk about the actual substance of what it is we're attempting to solve here. So, you know, it's incumbent upon us that if we're going to explore something like this, that we need to flesh it out in more detail. So that we don't leave it up to the imagination of people as to what it is we're intending to do, because it got very creatively and very effectively got changed into forced regionalization. I don't know that there are certainly people who do want to do that, right? I don't know. Most of my colleagues are not interested in that. I think we're trying to find some incremental approaches. As painful as incrementalism can be, it's certainly better than getting nothing done. So I think the approach that we take in actually putting out more detail than less will be helpful to our cause. And I think it actually might help inform the opponents of these things too, or help educate them about exactly what it is we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very, it was a terrible conversation to witness, but on some level, it's shown us kind of the guardrails around how we can do this better and have a more productive conversation as we move forward, because I actually think it really showed kind of what, you know, it showed kind of like the dark side of the conversation in a very transparent way. And I think that actually helped open the door to future efforts in a strange way. Like, not that I would condone it, but I think that it was it laid out in pretty stark terms, you know, where people fell. And I think it reflected a lot of what, you know, the politics that we see just nationally right now too, as well. You know, it just was like, this is who we are, black and white, you know, this is, you know, the differences that we have. So Lisa, there's I think a couple different parts of this question from Alex Knott, but basically he's asking about the weights in the funding formula, how they're determined, and the conversation around an adequacy study, I know Jason had mentioned earlier the foundational amounts, and there's been a lot of back and forth around adequacy studies in terms of how we determine a funding formula. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. There's a lot of academic research out there that states, and it's a true fact, that when you educate children that are low income and English learners, that it costs more to educate that child. However, the research does not give a specific percentage or dollar value as to the increase in cost. I actually have been looking to find this myself, and I haven't found anything out there to date. And every state, their funding system for K-12 education, every state is different. I do know that the foundation amount in our budget is considered, appropriate for the cost of a non-need student. However, you're correct. The determination of those weights were not based on any, they're not based on anything. 30% for a free and reduced price lunch student, 15% for an English learner. That's not based on anything. It was just various proposals were out in 2017 for an ECS formula. And when negotiation occurred on the final formula that would be employed, those weights were just determined, and they were not based on any true research that supported that those percentages are appropriate.
Okay. I just want to start wrapping things up a little bit. We're almost out of time. We have another 5 or 6 minutes left.
Amy, sorry, before you wrap up, I just want to make sure you saw Ashley Blunt had a question a bit earlier about, with all the eviction that's going on, whether your group and some of the panelists support some of the demands of the cancel rent group, which, and Ashley, feel free to correct me if this is wrong, is basically forgiving some of the unpaid rental debt that is accumulated during the pandemic through a direct payment to landlords.
Yeah, I think in a world of endless resources, we would all want to do that. I think it's a matter of, and I'm not discounting how serious this issue this will be for families and for landlords and for the state of Connecticut and our communities. It comes down to identifying the financial resources to do it. And I think, obviously the part-time nature of our legislature makes it more difficult. Obviously the fiscal constraints that we face make it more difficult. I know the spending cap does allow for some emergency expenditures. I don't know if this would be considered one. But I think first we have to identify the funding source, and then 2, get to the process to actually how we do it. And I don't know if the federal government might be able to help us in assisting in that. I mean, this isn't a Connecticut, something that's unique to Connecticut. Obviously, it's a national issue. And it'll be interesting to see if, whenever there is a next stimulus package that I think everybody is hoping is going to happen, and whether there's an opportunity to help address this issue. Because it is, we do have to keep in mind not only the tenants, but certainly the landlords too. Many of whom are, they're not all large landlords. Some of them own 1-2 apartment buildings, and this is their livelihood. And they have bills they have to pay too.
Thank you for raising my question. I just want to add on to what cancel rent is demanding. It is to center tenants, and knowing in cities as in Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, New Haven, and those numbers, a ratio between tenants and landowners, it's about a 75-25% split. And these are major cities where Black and Brown students live and grow. We are at the point where some of these cities also cannot afford resources for these students. So, having a place to be able to live and lay your head down at night is very vital. And I hear you, Representative, in regards to resources and things of that nature. But I would really urge this panel to think about what happens if we don't do something. We have seen that the federal government is not providing the support that we need at this time. They ushered in a new Supreme Court justice before another stimulus check hit the account of Americans. they're not going to support us. So what can the state do? What is the state in place to do? One of the wealthiest states in this nation. What is the state of Connecticut able to do at this time to support Black and Brown students to ensure that they have a place to live?
Ashley, thank you so much for contributing those comments. I don't feel like I have enough understanding around this particular program to I know you had asked about a group like ours signing on to something like that, and I would love to have a conversation with you afterwards. And because it's obviously a very important issue, and as we said at the top, we are education advocates. And sometimes we try and stay as close to our, issue as possible directly related to children, and certainly your concerns are. So thank you.
Amy, if I could just comment too, Ashley, thank you for your comments. And I just want to say we need to frame this conversation beyond just Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, because census data should be coming out soon. I know we saw exponential growth in suburban poverty from 2000 to 2010. I imagine it's going to be even worse from 2010 to 2020, in which the growth of poverty in suburbs actually outpaced the growth of poverty in cities. Now, granted, cities were starting at a much more difficult place. But I only say that not to pit us against each other, but to suggest that there's some political coalitions that I think can be had here if we start to think about these just beyond our core cities.
Well, it looks like we are almost out of time, and I just wanted to thank everybody for participating, for joining the call. Thank you, Representative Rojas, Sean, Lisa, Liz. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for all your questions, and really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody.